Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indian, our Youth in Action conversations about our future. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michaela Pavlat. I'm a Anishinaabe from the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. I'm a cultural interpreter at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Today's conversation is a highlight of Native youth activists and change makers working toward equity and social justice for Indigenous peoples. This conversation will focus on community healing. Now, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather today, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here. Today, we'll be having a conversation around mental wellness in Indian country. In the United States, Native Americans experience higher suicide rates than any other race or ethnic group. At times, it can be 3.5 times higher. In Indian country, mental health has been an issue for generations, as access to proper resources and advocacy is sparse. And clinics and hospitals outside of communities often fall short, as these resources do not properly address historical or generational trauma. Now, as a nation, we recognize September as National Suicide Prevention Month. And coming out of a long summer of COVID, we are going to have this discussion around community healing. To moderate this panel, please welcome Karis Poafpybitty.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I'm honored to be here today to help moderate. My name is Karis Poafpybitty. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the state of Oklahoma. I am a member of the Kiowa and Cherokee tribes. I currently reside in Tulsa on the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation. I own my own practice, Good Ways Interventions LLC, that I created about a year ago as a safe space for the Indigenous community here to start accessing those healing modalities. And as well as the Black and people of color community, I want to create a safe space for them to start that healing process. I like to incorporate traditional practices and beliefs in the treatment modalities that I use. I am currently trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is another trauma treatment, and I'm completing my certification in parent-child interactive therapy. I'm also a registered facilitator for the Circle of Security group, which is an attachment-based parenting group. And I've spent the last 8 years of my career in community mental health. So I'm excited to be here and talk to the panelists about community healing.
Thank you, Karis. We are so happy to have you. Now, today in this conversation, we will be discussing intergenerational trauma, mental health, and suicide. Karis, could you explain a little bit about intergenerational trauma, or what are the roots of historical trauma?
Right. So trauma or intergenerational trauma are trauma responses that are transmitted from parent to child or from one generation to the next. And we typically do this through our behaviors or the way we speak to our children, the way we speak to each other, our interactions, even tiny little cues. So when someone experiences trauma, what happens is that it actually changes the brain. It changes the way we think, it changes the way that we perceive the world, it changes our beliefs, and ultimately, of course, it's going to change our behaviors. So with historical trauma, or as we know, like the genocide of our people, and with the laws being enforced that didn't allow us to practice a lot of our traditional ceremonies until recently, a lot of that healing wasn't done during that time. And so our ancestors weren't able to do these ceremonies or conduct the ceremonies, and so they weren't able to facilitate that healing process or do what needed to be done because they were acclimating to Western civilization. And so this kind of perpetuated this cycle where, you know, now children are also experiencing trauma through their parents. They are hearing a lot of these beliefs that maybe the world is unsafe, and they in turn start having these trauma responses themselves. Now, recently, science and with the advancement of technology and genetics and all these wonderful things, we are finding that the epigenetics show that there are chemical markers on some of our genes as a result of this trauma and the prolonged trauma and complex PTSD.
Thank you for defining that. I think that'll really help our audience just join our conversation. And one thing I want to point out is it is Native organizations such as your own that provide the cultural-based resources to support the generations of Native people affected by this trauma. And Native youth are at the center of addressing the gaps in proper services for Indigenous people. And they are creating resources, programs, and projects that help all community members. Today, we are joined by some of those youth, such as Jazmine Wildcat, Marco Ovando, and Shyvana Underwood, to discuss their work and their communities. So can each of you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into this work? Let's start with Jazmine.
Dos Nita Ana Nanana, Jazmine Wildcat, Hanana Inana. Hello everyone, my name is Jazmine Wildcat. I am enrolled in Northern Arapaho. I am 17 years old and I live in Riverton, Wyoming, which is right off of the Wind River Reservation. I am a 2020 Champions for Change with CNAY, and I am the founder of the Ni'ini project, which means things are good in the Northern Arapaho language.
Thank you, Jazmine, and welcome. Now let's have Marco introduce yourself.
Wait, hold on. How na Marco Ovando nani ha no dosa wihi nua nawuna marka numa. Hello, my name is Marco Ovando. I am 20 years old and I am Western Shoshone and Northern Paiute from the Duck Valley Indian Reservation here in Oahe, Nevada. I am a student at Boise State University studying communications and political science with a minor in psychology. And I am a 25 under 25 Unity awardee, class of 2020, and it's great to be here.
Thanks, Marco. And Shyvana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Shyvana Underwood in Quinault. Good day, everybody. My name is Shyvana Underwood, and I come from the Quinault people. I am the secretary of the Quinault Canoe Society. I'm the vice president of the Quinault Culture Committee. I am a full-time student at Evergreen State College, where I'm studying Indigenous studies intertwined with social work. So I'm working on becoming an advocate for Indigenous communities. And I am also the administrative assistant at our behavioral health program for our tribe, where I work with mental health and chemical dependency. And last but not least, I am a 2020 Champion for Change with CNAY, where my platform is healing. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you all for joining us. I now will turn it over to our professional Karis to facilitate this conversation, and I will be back to join for the Q&A.
Thank you, Michaela. Hi, guys. It's nice to be with you again. So we were talking a little bit about, Michaela mentioned suicide earlier, and I know that that is a big issue in the Native community across the world, but specifically here in the United States. So I would like to know, in your own community, what are some of the mental health challenges that you see? And that's open to all of you guys.
For me, the most significant mental health challenge facing my community at the moment is getting youth the help they need. Since there is a stigma of mental illnesses, being bad, being a bad thing and being seen as taboo, no one wants to admit that they need help. Heck, it took me a little while to, come to terms that I needed help. And there are some services available, but many youth are just accepting things as they are, and when they would have so much more potential if these issues weren't holding them back. It's also tough for youth to identify there is a problem when these behaviors are multi-generational, when they see their parents or family and peers doing these things. All of this leads to our high suicide and substance abuse rates, which is a really big issue where I'm at.
Thank you, Jasmine.
For my community specifically, a problem facing our youth, especially in the terms of mental health, is definitely the access of getting mental health treatment. My community is very rural. We don't have a lot of resources on hand, especially with this pandemic going on. And also the fact that the assimilated, accepted culture that we got from our colonizers of holding in our emotions, keeping those emotions in, not telling anyone, not sharing them, not letting those emotions run free and out of your system, and just building it up and creating a toxic environment for not only yourself, but for your surrounding family, friends, relatives, that sort of thing, and just killing the stigma that has been adopted from colonization and assimilation into modern society is a big one for us.
For my community, I feel like there is a lot of issues, but I want to say trauma is the number one because it shows up in so many different ways, through domestic violence perpetrators, through drug addiction, which is a disease, and mental illnesses and having lack of resources. But currently, I think isolation is the biggest factor to having suicidal ideation rates be more right now. But I think trauma is one of the biggest issues that we are currently facing, but we're getting through it together as a community and trying to offer our programs to everyone who is willing to start their healing journey.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I agree with Shyvana. I think some of the trauma does definitely cause a lot of these, or are the root of the issues, which is why we want to talk about community healing today. And part of our traditional healing methods aren't practiced anymore, or people don't know about them anymore. A lot of the elders that hold those sacred rituals, they're dying, and especially with COVID, they're very susceptible right now. So Shyvana, you do use traditional coping mechanisms as a strategy for healing from trauma. Do you mind sharing some of those strategies that you've used that have helped you?
Absolutely. So I study our Quinault language. The last fluent speaker died in 1996, but we are currently revitalizing it through one amazing teacher, Cosette. She brought the program, and now our community is learning collectively. So I think people are finding healing in that and holding on to their identity that way. So I use mental health awareness in our language, telling people that they are enough in our language. So chikas or quikas, you are enough. And also we are ocean people, so we use our canoes, which are our ancestors. Our canoes are over 300 years old. So we use them on our ancestral highways. And when you get in that canoe, you have to use a strength you never thought you had. You feel like your arms are going to fall off. But once you complete that journey, once you travel 30 miles in one day on the ocean, you feel connected to your ancestors. You feel connected to yourself. And so we use culture in that way, and also singing our songs and our dances at potlatch or social jams, which are less formal. They're just fun for us to all come together and experience our songs, and whether they're from our ancestors or songs that we made up recently. So it's a mixture of songs, paddling, and using our language. And so I encourage everyone who's listening today to look into stories and things for you to connect with too.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that music is a huge part of our traditions. A lot of our songs are actually prayers, and so hearing those can be healing in themselves. So I enjoy listening to music and listening to the drums, Paiute songs, different things like that. What about Marco or Jasmine? Do you guys have any coping mechanisms that are traditional, or you feel are traditional, that help you?
For me, I keep like a little, some sage with me, and I know that the smell of sage is always very comforting. It reminds me of family and everything, and it's just, and yeah, it reminds me of my culture, and family has a really big part of of how I cope, because I think that family is a very important part of yourself, and you know, with me on my mom's side, you know, I live around my mom's side of the family, and we just have like 20 grandchildren from my one grandma. So I spend a lot of time with my cousins and with my you know, aunties and uncles, and it's really comforting, and it helps me, you know, it helps ground me, and that's how I, you know, it's that as opposed to, you know, like Western medicine.
Right, absolutely.
For me and my culture, so kind of like going off of what Jasmine said, for us, for some people it's sage. For my people, it's a root called doza. We don't know the exact colonized name or scientific name for the root. We just know it as doza. And you can find it in very rare locations, and it only pops up after prayer. And for us, that really brings us back into the land, ties us back into the land, goes back to our creation story of how we came up from the land, and how we're, as Nua people and Numa people, are one and the same with our Mother Earth. And that doza just reminds me of those creation stories, of that connection that with the earth. And also the very basic tradition of humor and laughter in our culture. We as Indigenous people, we're very loud. We love to laugh. It's not a normal day for me if I'm not laughing my head off over something that's like, it might be funny for us, and for the next person, it might not be so funny, but laughter for us is a really good way of uplifting each other's spirits, pretty much cleansing ourselves of negative spirits out of our systems, and just maintaining that mentality and stability of being pretty much Shoshone-Paiute here. So laughter for us.
Absolutely. I know that is one thing that I definitely incorporate in my sessions, is that laughter, or trying to see the funny side of some of the ways that we think. But I love that you guys all have this connection to Earth, which is something that I myself promote to my clients that have experienced trauma or have a history of trauma. But that connection, I mean, we know it helps us. And I actually went to an elder and got that information. I wasn't feeling very well, and so I called up my clone, my grandfather, and I asked him, you know, I don't know what to do, nothing else that I've been doing traditionally is helping. What else? And he said, you know, when you're outside, take your socks and shoes off and stand on the ground, you know, make sure that you can feel the earth beneath you, and then get down on all fours on your hands and knees, and, you know, just feel that energy coming from the earth. And it does make a huge difference. And I mean, us Indigenous people, we've always had these small things that we've done to help heal us or help us feel better, and we've lost some of that. So getting back to that, I feel like is really important, and starts the community healing. Jasmine, you mentioned family. So what else, or what do you think, as youth, like telling older people, what does community healing look like, and what needs to be incorporated into that?
So to me, community healing can be a lot of things. You know, it can range from having a safe space to where a person can be comfortable being themselves and can have the courage to seek help, to being kind and accepting of one another in the actual community, to also having enough resources for prevention, treatment, and aftercare so that one can heal within their own community. You know, and of course, as an Indigenous person, it's being able to be a part of your ceremonies as a method of healing. And, you know, we just need to just come together and just be comfortable around each other. And, you know, it starts with yourself. You know, you have to heal yourself before you can heal as a whole. So.
Very well put. Shyvana?
So for me, I believe healing is defined by you. No one can tell you how you are going to heal, whether you look into Western medicine through therapy, or you turn to your culture, or you really just turn to the land. I think it depends on you, but coming together and being inclusive to everyone. Nobody needs to be a gatekeeper of your culture. Just be collectivist and show that it belongs to everyone, not just one person or one group. We need to work together for our communities to thrive.
Absolutely. I do want to go back a little bit because we had talked about, I believe it was Marco, you brought up some of the things that you felt were lacking in the community, not having access to that. I do have a specific question. Do you feel like there's not enough healers in your community or therapists, or is it just the way the system is built?
From my standpoint, I believe it's a mixture of all of those aspects. For perspective, my community is a small rural ranching community 100 miles south of the nearest town and 100 miles north of the nearest town. So any trip for us is 2+ hours to get anywhere to seek professional treatment from like a psychologist or a therapist. So, and getting resources into our community is very hard too because of that isolation and that sense of solitude pretty much. The system here is not that built up to handle the mental crisis that we're dealing with now and mental crises that are yet to come. And I do believe there is a lack of healers that, but not in a lack of healers that they're just not there, a lack of healers that they don't know that they're healers yet because they just haven't gotten the opportunity to extend those natural talents and extend that healing to a community-wide basis to help include everyone into our system to help for the better benefit of the whole community.
So what do you guys think some solutions would be for this lack of access to mental health care?
For me, I think a solution, I know that, privately we've talked about it, and, I really agree with what Marco does is, telehealth, and that's, I can let him explain it more, but I agree, and I think that would be a really good, a solution, and especially for those who can't really afford it too, so I can let him,
Thank you, Jasmine.
All right, so just
Go ahead, Marco. Sorry.
Okay. So just like what Jasmine was mentioning earlier, I do believe like one of the best first steps is to increase the capabilities of bringing mental services to a reservation from a more standpoint, such as telemental health or telehealth. A cute little story, a couple years ago, my little brother was struggling with himself and not accepting who he was as an individual and as a Native American. He felt it was wrong to be Native American from the cultural pressure standpoint. And through telemental health services, with a psychologist hundreds of miles away who was able to reach into him and tell him that he is a proud Indigenous boy and that he should continue on with his life in his own sense, play by his own set of rules, and be his own authentic self. And for that, getting the telemental health here will be great for people who are needing just someone to talk to, someone professional, someone they could trust, to just get that message through and to feel like they have someone there that's supporting them, being the cheerleader in the back and just helping them when things go away, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you both for sharing that. Now, Jasmine, you started the NE, did I pronounce that correctly, project to help you or to help others with activism, and you are an activist yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project and how this project gets you through those tough times?
Yeah, so it's a Niini project, and yeah, you pretty good. So activism, it's helped me get through these tough times, by providing me an outlet to make change when I thought all hope was lost. Seeing results and the satisfaction of making a positive difference, gave me meaning, and it it proved that I had a purpose. So the Ni'ini project, provides that space to get involved and get that gratification of helping our local community, and even like nationally by just starting to write letters, or just getting that feel good of like our little projects that we do here locally. Like we've done, I've done a teddy bear toss. I don't know if you've heard of that with hockey. So at one of our basketball games, my high school basketball games, we had everyone in the crowd, have bring stuffed animals, and they tossed onto the court during halftime. And we donated those to our local police department to, keep in their police cars for little kids who have to go with them when things, aren't the best. And then we've also, done free ice skating for, just students. We mainly focused on like Native students, enrolled students, but then we opened it up to everyone because, everyone needs, to have a little fun in their life. And, and all the activism part, it's really important to, like I said, get out there and, have that ability to make a change when you think that, that you're insignificant. And I just want to say that, no one's insignificant and that you can do anything. Yeah.
That is definitely a traditional belief I think Indigenous people have, all Indigenous tribes, is that each one of us does serve a purpose. And I've heard both you and Marco talk about, somebody finding their purpose, whether it is a healer, a protector. And I think that that's great that you guys are already thinking this way as youth and can spread that. So I want to ask you guys, what can individuals do to help with the stigma around mental health, as well as maybe finding their purpose?
I think that what we can do, to bring down the stigma is really just talk about it, not be scared and not be ashamed. And like I said before, it took me a while to, really admit that, that I, had something, going on that wasn't normal. And that's just what prevents, some people from getting help, because they don't want to be like talked about, and like, because it is a taboo subject. And we just need to open up the conversation, get more exposure, like even, speaking about it in, health classes in school. Because I know that we talk about, broken arms and broken legs and stuff like that, but we don't talk about the injuries, like the injuries up here. And that's, I think, a very important thing. It's just the exposure and, letting people know that it's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing wrong. It's actually quite common. So.
Yeah, I agree with Jasmine on that. Best way to do it is just bring it to light. Just start the discussion. Light is the best disinfectant of them all, and bringing it to light is the best way to help you start erasing that stigma of that holding those emotions in, not telling anyone that is a bad thing. Tell those emotions to people, reach out. Jasmine mentioned talking about it in school curriculum. Definitely bring that out during health classes, and especially in topics that are more traumatic, especially to us as Indigenous peoples. Not just in health classes, like in history classes too, because we all know our history courses are deeply stigmatized against Native Americans and more for the colonization of the United States. And that could hit a sour point for many Indigenous people who feel left out, that we're just a part of history books. And by just bringing those topics back up into light and telling us we're relevant people, we're here, we still matter, that we could bring our mental health better out and start erasing that stigma of being ashamed of mental health, and that we're all imperfect beings, and that we all could be together through our imperfectness.
Absolutely. I love both of those messages. And that is one thing that I try to promote through my work, is talking openly and being authentic, talking about your feelings. And one conversation that I think we as Native communities need to have are sexual abuse within our own community by family members, adverse sexual play by children. Just those topics themselves can trigger a lot for people, And so those are tough conversations, but they need to be had in order to start that healing, because that is part of the trauma. Do you guys have any ideas about maybe how society can help decrease some of that stigma? So we've talked about like just us, ourselves, or people within the Native community, but what about those outside? I didn't know if Jasmine was going to go.
Well, I was just gonna really say it. It's just what we've been saying before, you know, just getting the conversation started, you know, because, you know, nationally, you know, I think we just need to start talking about it, because it's really a societal issue why we don't talk about, you know, anxiety and depression and everything else. It's just, you know, just getting the word out there, you know, that a lot more people are, you know, dealing with this than you think, you know. Yeah.
Or even just getting back to basics and back to expressing ourselves, expressing our feelings. I hear a lot of elders, you know, when they talk, or even in our native tongue, they do describe how they felt. You know, my heart is heavy, or my heart is so happy, or it's light, you know, whatever. But they describe that, they talk about that. And for some reason, that got lost too. So starting that, normalizing that we all experience these feelings throughout the day for just, you know, small periods of time if we acknowledge that. But absolutely, you guys are all on the right path. I am so excited. It was absolutely wonderful being here with you. Thank you so much. Now let's bring Michaela back so we can open it up to questions from our audience.
Thank you, Karis. And thank you all for the amazing conversation. We do have some questions in our Q&A box, so I'm going to go ahead and go with the first one. And so it says, for coping mechanisms that you use to help that are tied to your culture, what do you recommend for teens that may not live in their ancestral lands or near Native communities? So maybe for those urban areas away from their family.
I live in sorry, Shyvana. Marco, sorry. I live in a pretty urban area, and one thing that I tell people to do to get you back into that is just talking with your family. We talked today about how important family is in that healing process. So just sitting with them without the TV, without distractions, having a meal with them, that's huge for our culture. You know, sitting there talking to them over a meal, that is traditional.
Yeah, Shyvana, do you want to go next?
Yeah. I feel like I can't speak from someone who has been away from their ancestral homelands, because I have lived here. I was born and raised here. But when I travel, I understand I feel disconnected. And I think that's something that's pushed on you from like colonists. The land is everywhere. And in my culture, we are taught the people are the medicine. Without you, there wouldn't be medicine. So just understand, no matter where you are the medicine, and you can carry those teachings with you anywhere. No one can take it from you.
That's great. Thank you. Marco, did you want to hop on?
Yeah, so I'm a college student right now, and when I'm at college, I am in a very urban setting where there's not too many Native Americans around and not really finding my own people. And for me, especially my first semester of college, that was like one of my biggest struggles, was maintaining my my foundation as an Indigenous person while being a full-time college student in a very institutionalized setting that really doesn't, they say at face value that you are there, you're accepted, but deep down institutionally, you're not really there. And it's a really upward climb that you have to do. Reconnecting with Native Americans, and at college, there's all these Native American clubs that you can join that will connect you with more Indigenous people. They might not be from your own tribe, but they will always be there for you to support you and to get that medicine, to get that laughter, to sit down at dinner tables, just talk, just have that medicine right there. Just like Shyvana said, that our culture believes people are medicine too, and that by reconnecting with an Indigenous person, you're retied with that medicine and it increases tenfold. So it's a really great way for how I coped.
Thank you for sharing that. And kind of building off of what you were just mentioning of being away at college, or Jasmine, you're still in high school. Where can Native high school or college students go for resources and other information which may help them deal with the extra stresses of this school year?
So for me, I don't really, I'm still like just, and I still have my tough days. And, what I really do is just, I, for the more, I guess, traditional sense too, is, I pray. I guess that sounds cheesy, but, I ask the creator, for better days, or, for, some guidance, and I really just, for me, since I'm still in high school, I, go to my family, like I said, I'm very family oriented. I really rely on that connection. And, for my older sister, because she's in college in a way, I know that she also really stays connected with family by, calling us regularly and just staying in touch and everything, visiting family. And I think that's just a really big, important thing, is just family for me. But for those who, aren't really as family oriented, I would really just, just rely on that guidance, and, like what Karis was saying, rely on that connection with, Mother Earth, because she really, really does things for you.
Thank you, Jasmine. I do have another question that I think is great, kind of talking about each of your work and what you do in your community. How can non-Native allies support your efforts?
I think that for non-Natives who want to, support, Native causes, and I think just uplift, you want to help those speak out as opposed to speak for them. So, you can share resources, and, that we share, but I would really just think uplifting, Native voices, and, helping their platform and boosting them. And, that, I think that would really be the best way to really spread awareness and get out, get out what we're trying to say and what we're trying to, promote.
I think being curious is a good start. If you have questions of how you can help, or what specifically you can do, if there's somebody you have in mind, asking them, or if there is a tribal movement or some Native movement in your area, asking if you can join or you can help. But just being open and curious is a good start.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Jasmine and Karis said about just reaching out to us, provide us the platforms that we need to uplift our voices, because no one could tell your story better than you can. And having someone else be that that microphone is not the way to go, especially when it comes to Indigenous rights and getting the resources that Indian people need and the respect that we've been demanding for the past several hundreds of years. Just reach out to us and ask us how you can help with us. Could be as simple as volunteering at a food distribution for Indigenous peoples and getting to know the community members in that community, or as just simple as just saying, backing someone up, an Indigenous person up when they're being harassed, like say in the outside world. Just small things like that can help really be a good ally from a non-Indigenous perspective to help Indigenous peoples.
Thank you for those comments. As we are wrapping up, I do want to hear from everybody one last time. What's one message or takeaway you want the audience to walk away with today? Let's start off with Shyvana.
Yeah. Okay. I think my overall message to everyone, especially young Indigenous people, and I will reiterate it over and over again, that your culture is your identity and no one can take it away from you. You are capable of amazing things, no matter what obstacles you face. You have it in you to get through them. You have people who love you and want to uplift you, including myself. Reach out to me anytime for resources or someone to talk to or a letter of recommendation. I am here for you. And so are the other 567 nations who are fighting for our autonomy in this nation. We want you to thrive. So I hope you know that you are very important.
Yeah, definitely. I'll go to piggyback off of Shyvana, to normalize the thought that our ancestors are with us at all times. We come from the earth, you know, that connection to the earth is really strong. And so knowing that our energy just goes elsewhere, it's all around us. And so normalizing, talking to them, speaking about your feelings, those are the two things that I would want somebody to take home with them.
I guess for my takeaway to give to everyone is to never be afraid to be who you are. Never be ashamed of that, because you are created in Appa or Creator's perfect image of what he or she or whatever Appa is to make you be on this planet. And then my other takeaway is to always remember that if you're ever feeling lonely, everywhere on this turtle island is Indigenous land, whether it is not on reservation or on reservation. You are standing on Indigenous land 24/7, 365. So always take pride in that whatever happens, you are always there on Indigenous land and you are Indigenous, and be proud of that.
What I want everyone to know is that, speaking in, on mental health, I just want to, and I keep reiterating this too, is that, don't be ashamed. Yeah. And, it's everything, happens for a reason. And it's just, anxiety and depression, it's more common than you think. And don't be afraid to reach out, even though it might be a bumpy ride, just starting out to reaching out, that it will get better, and that everyone has a purpose, and you do you when it's your own journey on your path to healing. But yeah.
Once again, I want to thank all of our panelists. That was incredible. And our guest moderator, Karis, for joining our really important conversation today. And you can follow their work in the link in our chat. So that was just dropped in there. But thank you everyone that has worked on our Youth in Action series, our participants, our panelists, and all those that came before us to make this possible. I encourage you to check out our website, americanindian.si.edu/NK360, to learn more about our programs and access our educational resources, and sign up for our virtual programs. Please be sure to check out our YouTube pages as well to view other museum programs, and a special thanks to our National Council of the National Museum of the American Indian for their generous support of this program. Thank you.